Nothing feels quite as bad as falling out of love with a game. Wrangling complicated feelings for a game that you like sucks. You know you're having fun, you know parts of it are incredible, but the game just keeps getting in its own way to where you can't actually tell if you like it or not. I've had this happen with a few games, but top of the mountain is Dragon's Dogma. I've beaten Dragon's Dogma 5 times now, including this most recent run, and after playing the game for countless hours and doing everything there is to do in it, I still don't know if I like it or not. I know, coming to that conclusion now is realizing you've been shot when they've already got you in a box 6 feet under, but I feel like I knew this from the beginning. What I'm trying to do now, then, is parse what exactly it is about Dragon's Dogma that has me so conflicted. Why can't I just say if I like this game or not? If somebody asked me what I thought about Dragon's Dogma, I really wouldn't know what to tell them. It would take at least 47 minutes to explain it in detail and make my points. Trust me, I got a good feeling about that number. And again, things get difficult. Like with Asura's Wrath, the story and gameplay are mixed in a very unique way in Dragon's Dogma that make a beat-by-beat recap extremely hard and kind of useless. Capcom in the early 2010s really knew how to make my job hard. The reason for this is because if we just went beat by beat to explain the plot of Dragon's Dogma, we'd all be out of here before we got our coats off. Dragon's Dogma's story is non-existent except for the very beginning and very end. For 95% of the game, you'll pretty much get nothing to go off of plot-wise, except for completing quests that are, in storyline, pointless fluff. The basic idea is that a dragon has appeared in your world and stolen your heart, with a beautiful poem and his large dragon claws. You want to get your heart back, so you venture to the capital to join the king's hunting party, and then you get him. Am I leaving out some subplots and side quests that flesh it out a bit more? Yeah, but the story isn't much deeper than what I explained. You get hints at what the game is leading up to with the Everfall and the concept of pawns, but if it's regarded, it's not for very long or with any importance. Instead of seeing this as a failing of the game, though, I find it more as an intentional choice made by the director, Hideaki Itsuno. This guy's gonna be on Capcom's Mount Rushmore with Keiji Inafune and Yoshinori Ono, and we won't even have to cover his face like an anime fan on prom night. He directed every DMC game since 2, worked on some of the definitive Capcom fighting games like CVS 2, Power Stone, and Heritage for the Future. The guy is royalty. Dragon's Dogma, though, is his baby. Itsuno is a big tabletop RPG fan, and the inspiration from games like Dungeons & Dragons is inescapable through all of Dragon's Dogma. Around the time you start fighting beholders, you get the idea. I feel like plot and setting-wise, the game is going for something like a pre-built D&D campaign, where you get a basic save-the-world plot and a few static characters to interact with, and the story is more based around how you interact with them. The game gives you a goal to work towards, but leaves the job of making a story up to your experiences. Dragon's Dogma's story is more about what you do on your quest rather than what that quest actually is. The monsters you fight, the routes you take, the quests you do, these are the stories rather than a typical plot-based structure. You would tell your friends who have never played the game, oh yeah, I was on my way to the castle when I went a bit off the beaten path and found this giant who I had to cling to and climb up, stab him in the eye over and over again until I killed him. It was awesome! If you're talking to somebody who has played Dragon's Dogma, you can talk about how your experiences differed from theirs. Like, did you scale all the way up the mountain and past the bandit camp to find the Chimera and kill them to get their material? This is a fun idea and a really neat way to do a story-light game, but it comes with huge drawbacks. Just like with a pre-built D&D campaign, the game often feels painfully generic and without a distinctive bone in its body. A consequence of the plot's lack of focus is that the world of Dragon's Dogma is super forgettable. The world of Gransys and the kingdom of Gransorin are paper thin. There is a memorable landmark in the entire map in the form of a giant warrior geoglyph in the side of a hill. But as far as locations go, the rest are interchangeable. A mine here, a dungeon there, All feel the exact same without even so much as a gimmick to separate one from the other. There's a water dungeon that needs you to lower water levels in order to advance, but the water in Dragon's Dogma is made of pure undiluted monster and kills you when you fall into it. The world feels so vacant and uninhabited because there are areas with names and clear backstories that should be available, but the most you'll get is a pawn commenting on it as you're walking through. There's a zone on the south part of the map called the Eradication Site. Why is it called that? What eradication took place here? There are the remains of a battle, but you never learn between who or for what. Shadow Fort, Tomb of the Unknown Traveler. Blue Moon Tower's entire description says they don't know who built it. How does the game not know what's going on? The culture of Gransys is also impossible to pin down. They took a little bit of every European country they could and shoved it all into one setting without any regard for how they would look next to each other. Some spots look Mediterranean, others Anglo-Saxon. The accents are done by saying, "Do I feel French or Spanish?" at the beginning of every sentence.
Gransys would take the Ascendant. But her neighbors ill want the giant looming at their borders, am I wrong?
Spare me your sophistry. The word neighbor sours on your forky tongue.
A good comparison is to Skyrim. The world has a very clear inspiration from Scandinavian culture with the longhouses and general Viking vibe the region has. I'm not saying every fantasy culture has to be based on a real one, but you also can't base it on all of them. The characters that inhabit this boring world are no better. I can name 3. The Duke is probably the standout one, since you get to see his mask slip more and more as you get closer to actually killing the dragon, finding out that he never killed the dragon he claimed to, and instead sacrificed his wife to stave him off. Finding him in the post-game as a huddled, pathetic wreck that tries to kill you for accomplishing what he couldn't is a really cool sight, and I wish there was more of him in the game to make this moment land better. A problem with the Duke, though, is that nothing ever has any consequences. Nothing you do ever changes the Duke's opinion of you, and nothing he does to you ever has any lasting consequences. So one of the first cutscenes you can see after meeting him is to find him drooling and dead-eyed and choking his wife to death. If you intervene, you get thrown in the dungeon. You escape the dungeon, and go right back to work for him. In the cutscene in the post-game where he attacks you, he calls all the guards in who then attack you, saying, "Oh, I knew you were evil the entire time, Arisen, you couldn't be trusted." And then as soon as the cutscene is over, the guards never attack you again. What does it say that this is one of the best characters in the game, and I don't got a damn clue what his name is? Celine is a pawn who was given a soul and is hunted for being a witch. She's got the one good side quest in the game, and if you're going to have any character be your ride or die at the end, she's a good choice. Thinking of this just now, this is a world where magic exists. There are spellcasters and sorcerers all over the place. Using magic is not uncommon. Who the f*** cares about a witch? Funny enough, the character they did the best job on was also the character they needed to nail the most. The dragon. Gregori is my favorite character in the game. He has 3 scenes. Favorite character, 3 scenes. What the hell are the rest of you doing that you don't matter more to me? Each time he does appear, though, we get a bit of a closer look at what his goals actually are. He could easily kill you like the other villagers, but instead feels like he's testing you by taking your heart away. Why would he want to do that? What reason would a dragon have to motivate somebody to beat it? In his second appearance, he disposes of the previous antagonists, the Salvation Cult, and again affirms he wants to fight you. He has a really calming and disarming voice when he starts to speak English, not your typical dragon voice at all. In the final encounter, he gives you the chance to back out and take the same bargain the Duke did, but is way more interested in actually fighting you. During the fight, he remarks about how invigorated he is and is coaching you on how to beat him. In the post-game, you get to learn a lot more about Gregori and find out that, like you, he was an Arisen who had his heart stolen by the previous dragon. He killed that dragon and was taken to the throne of a godlike being called the Seneschal. The Seneschal itself is a different Arisen, the one you play as during the tutorial, who seeks another Arisen strong enough to take his place. Fail, and you get turned into the next dragon. Beat him, and now you control the next dragon, becoming the god of this plane of existence and controlling everything. It's a fascinating idea that takes root in a cycle of reincarnation that demands people with strong wills stand up and do something, the very reason you were picked. Everybody but you ran away from the dragon, so you might have the willpower necessary to be the next Seneschal. If you look back at the events of the game before this, Gregori doesn't really do a lot. He does the initial attack on the village to call you out, but doesn't do anything again until reappearing after the salvation cult is taken out. When you look at it like that, you realize that he's trying to minimize damages so only you are affected, the one with the willpower strong enough to defeat him and the Seneschal. One really cool feature is that this Seneschal and its helper will be the previous player who beat the game if you're playing online. If you're not, and play on New Game Plus, the Seneschal that you fight will be your previous Arisen and helper from the last playthrough. If the whole game went as in-depth as this final stretch where you get everything explained to you over the course of a hallway, it would feel a lot more complete and like a real experience. But unfortunately, getting a lore dump as you're finishing the post-game leaves the rest of the game just feeling undercooked. I was floored to find out there's a Dragon's Dogma anime. About what? To balance out the negative, let's hit the game's biggest positive. And depending on who you are, this will negate every bad thing I have to say. Dragon's Dogma has world-class combat. After playing Dragon's Dogma, you'll never be able to go back to anything slower without feeling like you're wading through mud. Skyrim might have it beat in world, story, and character, but Dragon's Dogma blows it out of the water with combat. The basis of combat is your three classes you get at the start of the game: Fighter, Mage, and Strider. Fighters are sword and shield, Striders use knives and bows, and mages get staffs and spells. Each of these can either be upgraded into a super class that enhances all the aspects of that class, or merged with either of the other two classes to give you access to what they can do. If you start the game as a fighter, you can either upgrade into a warrior, which gives you access to heavy weapons, or dip into one of the other two classes for a hybrid, like Mystic Knight getting your heavy-hitting physical attacks on top of the option for magical enhancements, or becoming an assassin, which gives you the range of the bow, but better damage from your swords. These wouldn't be worth as much, though, without the different techniques each class gets access to. Independent of your level is a vocation level that increases the longer you stick with a class. The higher the level, the more skills you can unlock, like branching combos, stat boons, and techniques you can slot in that give you extra moves. For Fighter, you get a lunging stinger move, a launcher, an upward slash to deal with flying enemies, a shield bash, a shield clang to draw enemy attention, and so much more. Classes that use the same weapons let you carry over the various skills between them. So even if you didn't learn, say, trifold shot in the assassin route, you can still learn it if you started as a Strider. This incentivizes you to dip in and try all the different vocations, not just to see if you would like them, but also to collect bonuses that could help you in the class you want. It's brilliant! If you're hurting against magic users, dip into Mage or Sorcerer for a while to unlock their magic resistances, and then switch back to an actual class. I have said some truly unforgivable things about people who main magic in RPGs, and Dragon's Dogma is the best for that, cause you can just put all the magic bullshit on your helper and never have to think about it. The combat itself is where Itsuno's time working on DMC goes from notable to obvious. Dragon's Dogma isn't quite character action like DMC and similar games, but against your typical fantasy RPG, it's practically Ninja Gaiden. Fights against enemy groups are exciting. You'll frequently run off the beaten path to fight some bandits or goblins, not because you need item drops or experiences, you do it because the combat is really fun. You get this great free-flowing feeling to fights where you can switch targets on the fly if you take out one mid-combo. You can mix in the extra techniques to go for big damage or keep a combo going even longer. Work with the other members of your party to do combo attacks or power yourself up. It feels great. Those group fights are a highlight as you work up from tackling each enemy one by one to carving through entire groups or unloading a machine gun's worth of arrows to take them out in seconds. There's also some strategy for when you learn specific enemy weaknesses, like cutting off Saurian tails to reduce their defense, or using fire on wolves and lightning on harpies. Dragon's Dogma's combat is equal parts frenetic and strategy-based, not just letting you swing like a madman or play the waiting game. The thoughtfulness of the combat is really shown off in the game's crowning achievement, the large monster encounters. All over the map are specific areas that have the chance to spawn in much stronger enemies like giants, chimeras, and griffins. Taking them on is something the game actively discourages. It tells you that if you run into one unprepared, run away. You're gonna lose. Nipping at their ankles like a bloodlusted toddler isn't going to get you very far, so to beat them, you'll have to mount them. Grabbing is kind of an important part of the game until you get to the giant fights, where it becomes essential if you want to win. You're able to scale larger enemies in the style of Shadow of the Colossus, crawling around their bodies to reach weak points and stab at them to stagger the monsters. Before even getting into the minutia of these fights, this is badass. Most other games would force you to just crowd around a monster like this and take pot shots at its legs. This is what made the dragon fights in Skyrim so disappointing. Here though, if you want to take down a monster this big, you're gonna have to go to war with it. Clinging for dear life as a chimera whips you around, or a griffin takes flight, is the sort of spectacle you want from an over-the-top action game. You want to feel like you're wrangling a massive beast, watching your stamina drain as the monster rampages, struggling to make it to their head to slay them. It's the most fulfilling experience in the game. Every class has something to do in these fights. Striders are the ones climbing the monsters to get to their weak spots, then gouging into them until the monster is toppled. Mages make it easier by providing heals and using elemental weaknesses against the monsters. And fighters are there for when the mages and striders manage to down the beast, where they become a blender who deals as much damage as possible while they're staggered. Having these three roles working in balance makes it feel like a team effort to take down the monster, and you've got to be on point the entire time. Fights with these monsters are wars of attrition, taking 10 to 15 minutes to take down one in the early game, and if you mess up once, it's over. You can stay in control for the most part, but if you mess up once, you can lose loads of health and potentially the entire fight. You can tell almost instantly that the staff who worked on Monster Hunter also worked on Dragon's Dogma, and I think the main source of this was gameplay lead Kento Kinoshita, who worked on planning for every Monster Hunter up to Ultimate 3. He's also the director for the game's expansion, Dark Arisen, but we'll talk about that later. To dip back into the negative though, the game doesn't always do these fights well. For every fight with a Drake or Chimera, you get an Ogre or a Hydra. Ogres are a fairly common large enemy who don't get the boss health bar, but hit just as hard as one. They're smaller, more mobile, and are way better at tackling groups than any other big enemy. This also shows off some of Dragon's Dogma's flavorful depth, and not in the best light. If you have a female party member when you fight an ogre, they'll get really horny when the fight starts. This gives you a few seconds to wail on him when he starts cranking his hog, but after that, they're significantly faster and stronger for the rest of the fight, doubled when they enter their rage state. Any sort of depth like this, having the sex of your character matter in a fight is never to your benefit. Hydras, I think, are just a bad idea for a fight, but they make more sense to cover later on, so just remember them. I also think that anytime the game tries to go in a different direction with its boss fights, it's a mistake. There are three I can think of in the main game: the Twin Lich fight, Gregori, and the Seneschal, and all three of them are major letdowns. The twin liches attack by summoning skeletons and casting spells, but they only have AoE spells with huge wind-ups. The fight is really as simple as using the bow to shoot them from the ground, avoiding all damage by walking slowly in a circle around the arena. Gregori's fight is climactic as hell and really cool looking, but once the part where you actually have to fight him starts, it gets really boring. You get to wail on him for a bit, but then he runs away and will stay in the sky for as long as it takes until you run over to a ballista he hasn't blown up yet. The Seneschal fight is just pathetic, since the damage scaling in this game for boss enemies is way different to the damage for basic enemies. Several climactic fights are ruined when it takes a few sword swings to kill the enemy instantly. The Seneschal is the worst for it, since you kill him and his pawn in 2 swings, culminatively, only for the fight to keep going because he hasn't gotten through his dialogue yet. It is the wettest of wet farts to end out a game with a lore dump, as the opponent dies in the first hit and spends the rest of their dialogue throwing out repukins that don't do enough damage to even matter. Don't let those complaints dull the key point here. This game is so much fun to play. I love hunting monsters. I think it's second to none for making you feel like a total badass. Not even the other Capcom game about monster hunting, Lost Planet 2, feels this good. Shame then that you share your journey with the goddamn pawns. Aside from the combat, Dragon's Dogma's most famous mechanic is the pawn system. Just gonna explain what a pawn is and let you fill it in for yourself why these things are so weird. Pawns are a race of creatures who look exactly like humans. They're functionally the same as humans, except they have no emotion or willpower of their own. Pawns are completely and totally beholden to the Arisen who created them. Pawns cannot live without their Arisen, or else they'll become despondent and depressed. No need for a rope, though. Pawns can't die and can resurrect as many times as you want. Pawns will literally do anything you ask them to, no matter how detrimental it is to their health, and will always be nice to you, even if you're actively antagonistic or violent towards them. A large portion of the population of Gransys do not like the pawns. They think they're creepy and are denied entry into various locations, which they don't care about because they have no emotions and cannot care what people say about them. While it sounds kind of weird, I like how pawns play into the wider theme of willpower that Dragon's Dogma has. Your willpower is so strong that it motivates a completely passive creature to fight alongside you, one that lacks the ability to think for itself. Pawns have no willpower themselves, but can gain it if their Arisen gives up their life to give it to them. We see that with Celine, a pawn who was made human by her Arisen. And we see it in the best ending for the game, where you do the same for your pawn. No, the worst part is when we look at pawns mechanically. Pawns are what makes up the rest of your party. What would be other players in a multiplayer game are instead pawns, who you can customize just the same as yourself and use to do things you can't. Personally, I used my pawn as a mage to keep me alive with healing magic and to power me up with elemental boons that let me hit harder. 2 people, though, isn't a traveling party, it's a crowded urinal. So you can boost your numbers by taking additional pawns you recruit on the journey. This is done either by finding them wandering around, or going to the Rift to search for pawns that specifically have skills that you want. When I upgraded my pawn to Sorcerer, who loses out on healing magic, I got another pawn who could do the healing, and a Strider for the sake of diversity. These pawns can either be ones made by Capcom, or the big selling feature, recruitable from the pawns other players make. The servers have since been shut down, but when it was an option, you were able to rate the pawns of your friends and send them back with gifts if they've done a good job. This encourages you to make your pawn look the best it can, have the best skills, and be as appealing to other players as possible. No, the cane is because I have a bad back. The big fur jacket is because it was cold out, and the pimp hat was because I wanted to look like a pimp. Luckily, you won't be sending any presents for good behavior because god damn it are the pawns stupid. The pawn system gets a lot of praise for how unique the idea is. letting you make an RPG party of you and your friends' creations, but there are major problems with how it works. Most pressing of all is that the pawns suck at fighting. Pawns contribute very little in the grand scheme of things, outside of a little extra support and a little extra damage. But you're not sharing the burden of combat. Pawns are more like wiping your forehead as you carry the entire fight on your back. Watching a pawn cling to the back of a chimera before doing nothing and then falling off once they ran out of stamina is maddening. And even when they choose to help, it's not always that helpful. Magic users have access to a spell called Affinity, coming in the 6 different flavors that magic comes in this game, which temporarily buffs melee classes by giving their weapons the property of the element it's associated with. While this is good against enemies with elemental weaknesses like wolves or harpies, other enemies take massively reduced damage if the wrong element is used, like how dragons take only 20% of damage from fire attacks. Wanna guess what spell I had to physically switch off my pawn's moveset so he would stop buffing me with the wrong buff against an enemy he knows doesn't take fire damage? Remember the Hydra I mentioned? It has an attack where it can eat somebody and swallow them. The swallow is an instant kill, but you have time to sever the head before it finishes and free whoever got eaten. If your pawn gets swallowed, you have to make a mad dash for the head, avoiding the others trying to attack you, and wail on the neck long enough for the head to pop off and save your pawn. If you get eaten, the pawns will take their time to explore the depths of their ass with their thumb as they sit there and watch you get eaten. I don't know how you're supposed to fight these things with the 3 dumbest bastards in the 7 seas. You can adjust their fighting strategies at certain benches around the world, but a whole lot of nothing changes when you do it. What does change is just what they call out when you get knocked down, they get knocked down, when a monster is about to die. Purely cosmetic, nothing important. And Keely, you can only adjust your own pawn. If you want your rented pawns to wisen up and stop doing things you don't want them to do, you kinda just have to shout the 3 baked-in commands at them and hope that it gets through their thick skulls. Speaking of the rented pawns, it's a cool option, but there are some major problems along with the system. The pawns you rent can't level up. They stay at the same level they are when you rent them and can never get stronger. This means that pretty quickly after a few fights, your pawns start to hold you back. You outscale them so quickly and have to go back to rent new pawns that match your level, only for them to get outscaled as well. Armchair game designer here, but wouldn't it be cool if at certain progress points in the game, you unlock a 3rd and 4th pawn to customize all over again, making a party of 4 that by the end of the game is truly all your own? Instead, not only do the 2 rented pawns make it feel like you're just hiring help, it also makes the game feel so much less personal. Your party never gets to have any cohesion, and you don't get to grow alongside half of your party members. Instead, you just swap them out for a new face with a higher number who might be a bit less of a liability in combat. This would hurt even more if the pawns had personalities you could grow attached to, but at a point, you'll wish you could get rid of all the pawns in your party, yours included. More than their uselessness in combat or the frustration of playing with a revolving door on your party, the worst part of the pawns is that they are insipid and only talk because there's no tax on it. As you travel around Gransys, pawns will occasionally chime in with something to say. Maybe commenting on the environment or an enemy. Maybe even remind you of a weakness or quirk they have. This is useful the very first time they say something you don't already know. The very next time, and you'll wish you had a muzzle. Pawns will repeat dialogue you've heard every time you're in that situation. If you're fighting wolves, they'll remind you they attack in packs. If you're close to the water, they'll remark about how close the ocean is. If you sever a saurian tail, they'll tell you you severed a saurian tail. Thank you, pawn! I had an idea when the tail blood got in my mouth! If they had something helpful to say, it'd be one thing. Or if their stupid comments were limited to once or twice, I could bear it. The fact that pawns are so goddamn verbose while having nothing to say makes me regret not turning their dialogue off in the options sooner. Yes, you can turn their dialogue off if you get sick of it, but tell me this. If you have to include an option to keep people from getting annoyed at how much the pawns talk, why not just not make the pawns talk so much? I wanna like the pawn system since it's a great idea, but unlike a lot of people, I think the execution was pretty piss poor. My last major point isn't really any one idea, it's more a collection of topics that all seem to tie back into one idea: speed. Not like game speed or anything. I mean, whenever I think of a few of the problems I have with this game, it usually comes back to having to do with speed. So, the first real quest you get in the game is to make it from the starting village to Gransys, the capital city. The game doesn't have any fast travel like the carts in Skyrim, so you gotta hoof it there through a few different paths. The first time you do it, it plays into what I was talking about, where the actual journey you take is where you get your enjoyment. You might go off the beaten path and find a goblin den, a giant to fight, maybe even a dungeon hidden behind a waterfall. If there was nothing back here, there'd be a fine from the government. However, if you want to go back that way to do a quest or to visit home, you're going to find out that there's no fast travel, period. You'll be walking the entire length of the way back on foot at the same speed. There's no way to run faster, no horses, no carts, nothing. You'll need to come back this way a lot for quests, since there's a whole third of the map on the other side of a fork in the road, so you'll be spending a lot of the game walking. Just walking from point A to point B, encountering the same nests of enemies every time you do in the same spots. Goblins, bandits, saurians, undead, they'll always be there every single time. Now, I know I said I liked fighting them, but when every trip plays out the same way, down to the same encounters in the same spots, you check out fast. It doesn't matter how engaging the combat is. This is also the kind of game where you need stamina to run, so if you get low on it after a fight or from running for too long, you either have to stand in place and wait for it to regen, eat some mushrooms, or do this awful little walk, sprint, where you try to get as much distance covered as you can before getting tired again. Any one of these creates a miserable feeling stop-start approach that makes long journeys last even longer. All of the side quests also require loads of travel time, and are really boring quests to boot. Either they're kill a certain amount of enemies, which you take and forget you even have running until randomly achieving them, or they're escort missions. Ah, perfect! Now I get to drag a fourth idiot through monster-filled lands to show him a rock! The main quests are the same, just with a lot more proper nouns and cutscenes. Hey, let's make one of the unavoidable quests you have to do to finish the game a 15-minute long escort mission with a slow-ass cart! Oh my god, give that guy a raise! None of the main quests even get you closer to beating the dragon. You run around doing unrelated odd jobs until Gregori shows back up, literally crushing the plot in progress. I know that it's an intentional choice to showcase the Duke keeping you from surpassing him, but that doesn't make it any better. Funny enough, I'll use a recent Capcom example. Alex was just revealed for Street Fighter 6, and his big climactic level 3 super move is a heel hook. Not a power bomb or a muscle spark or anything, a fucking heel hook. That's because he's playing the bad guy, and doesn't use a flashy level 3 to make the audience hate him more. I get that, I just don't like it. Keep in mind that during this, the peanut gallery will be chiming in to comment on the same tree you pass 8 times a day. Now, I say there's no fast travel, but there is. They just handled it in a quirky way. You can't warp to the places you've already visited, instead you need to find warp crystals. You place these down, and you're allowed to immediately transport to them whenever you want. That is, as long as you have a fairy stone. Fairy stones are a consumable that lets you use the warp crystals, and no, you didn't mishear me, fast travel is tied to a consumable. You have to travel to a super out-of-the-way merchant to buy fairy stones for fast travel, but you can't fast travel anywhere you want, only where you placed warp crystals. So if you want to get somewhere that doesn't have a warp crystal, hopefully you put one nearby, or one of the cities is close to it, because those are the only 2 spots you can always warp to. Other than that, You gotta place the warp crystal first. Best case scenario is you know where to go ahead of time, place a crystal there preemptively, and then can instantly warp to it. This will require you to be on your second playthrough, so won't be much help on the first one. Now, in Dark Arisen, the re-release that's standard issue these days, you do get an Eternal Fairy Stone that will let you warp as many times as you want to without there being a consumable element. But that doesn't get the game off the hook for being designed that way to start with. And you also have to know the stone is in your inventory, since the game doesn't tell you it's there. If you want to catch up on some light reading, the travel time shouldn't be too bad, but otherwise, it brings the game to a screeching halt way too often. Another issue tied to speed is character progression. Level ups don't actually take that long and come with frequency. You even get a full heal upon level up, which does come in handy. The problem is what level ups actually do. Nothing. Level ups in this game increase your stats by such a pitiful amount, you could convince me that if you didn't change anything. You feel the increase in the macro sense from level 1 to level 50, but the level to level increase feels like nothing. When you progress your character, when you get stronger, you want to feel that increase. You want to feel like you can tackle stuff you couldn't before, like you're ready to fight the stronger bosses and collect better items. With how little you improve between levels, though, it's hard to gauge your own strength, meaning you might get ahead of yourself and get into fights you can't win. I finished the quest before the dragon fight with no problems at all. Enemies were melting in front of me as I was killing 2 giants at the same time. The very next area, though, ratchets up the difficulty, where I had to spend an extra 5 hours getting to level 46. The kicker was that even after all of that, and farming the strongest enemies in the game for the best items and higher stats, I didn't feel any stronger. And that's the most important part. It's one thing if my number goes up, but I want to actually be able to beat stuff I couldn't before. This slow character progression makes early game exploration feel terrible, as you're scolded so majorly for going off the beaten path with enemies you can't deal with. Take the wrong road on your way to the castle, bandits carve you to pieces. Go to the dungeon right next to the starting area, saurians eat you alive. The game is railroaded for the first 10 hours before you get to the castle and get to upgrade your gear that you don't even want to explore once you get the option. Of course, the game shouldn't let you gun it for the dragon, but shouldn't be so hostile to a player who wants to explore the open world. That's why the open world is there! To explore! If you want to stop new players from gunning it for the dragon directly, there's a way to do that. Use the giant enemies, that's what they're there for. There's supposed to be signposts saying, don't go this way, you're gonna die. The way they choose to go about this instead is by giving generic grunts so much health that you're not going to be taking them out in one swing until playthrough 3. Imagine getting to level 30 in any other RPG and you can't deal with the basic grunts in one hit. It feels awful. You can upgrade your weapon by collecting parts that fall off the monsters you hunt, a la Mega Man Star Force, but again, it doesn't feel worth it in the long run when a level 3 weapon and a level 1 weapon are so close in tangible strength. This sword is 200 points stronger than this sword, and it doesn't feel like they're any different at all. It was actually while slaughtering dozens of snow harpies to collect feathers to upgrade my sword that I had an epiphany about Dragon's Dogma. The collection of brain-dead followers, the extremely long travel times, the farming to get incrementally less bad weapons? This is an MMO! As soon as I realized that, it all came into view. I hate MMOs! Never liked the style of decreasing the entire population of lizards to craft boots with an 8% increase against frost damage on a Wednesday. So the fact I didn't like it when it was offline made all the sense in the world. Probably could have just looked at how the next Dragon's Dogma game was an MMO and figured that out. The generally slow pace of the game really affected a lot of the other elements that I think were excusable, and even parts that I liked. The super slow progression made me realize I don't really care about what's going on. I was going through all this time and effort to grind for characters and a world I didn't care about. Oh, Evil Knight with a mask is actually Evil Knight without a mask! I can act surprised, but I think you just find that condescending. I was doing mundane quests without a reason to be doing them aside from beating the game just for the sake of beating it. I was spending so much time traveling and doing nothing enjoyable that frequently my will to play dried up, and I had to take long breaks before getting the motivation back. Having to go through the motions in those samey combat encounters eroded my enjoyment of the combat, and when that was the part of the game keeping me there, it was all struggles after that. I still saw it through, but the game wore out its welcome towards the end. After the dragon is beaten, you get a new endgame zone called the Everfall that lets you farm out rare bosses for drops and wake stones you need to get the good ending. I got sick of it fast though, since they only have so many bosses to fight, and one of them is the Hydra, and I wasn't putting up with it. Any room that isn't a boss fight has one of two templates that will rot your brain from how often you see them over and over and over again. You can stay there for as long as you want, but frankly, it wasn't worth staying. Also, since I don't have a better place to put it, despite the improvements to Dark Arisen, there is some stuff you miss out on. The game had a crossover with Berserk for the Golden Age film trilogy that let you get Guts and Griffith's armor and weapons that have been removed from the next-gen versions of the game. Thankfully, they left Casca in the game. The biggest omission, though, is with the start screen. Ever feel like you've been denied your birthright? No, not even in a racist way. You should, because the license to the game's original theme song ran out, and left us with this frankly forgettable track that ignites no feelings in me. The original track, Into Free, is one of the most out-of-place and unfitting tracks for a fantasy game you could think of, that ends up fitting perfectly. It really does define the game's identity as an over-the-top and wholly unique experience, and the game does suffer in its absence. Oh, and before we get to the ending, I want to touch on the DLC. There are going to be some people with 400 hours in this game that will tell you, oh, you just need to rush to bitterblack. The game really starts at bitterblack. You should really just play bitterblack. Okay, the DLC is very good, and much better at the base game when it comes to structuring. The Metroidvania structure of bitterblack does make for a more enjoyable experience than the base game, but what are you really saying there? You're saying that this game gets good 60 levels in? That's the level they recommend you go to bitterblack at, by the way. Level 60 at least. If you tell me that the best game ever is hidden behind 60 levels of grinding, then it's not the best game ever, because there's 60 levels of grinding in front of it. You don't care, because you did those 60 levels 10 years ago when the DLC came out, so you get to just waltz in and forget what a pain getting those 60 levels was. Oh, and level 60 is just the bare minimum. You should shoot for level 70 or 80 or 90 before really starting bitterblack, which means you're gonna have to play through the game 3, maybe 4 times before you're ready to tackle the DLC. Does that sound like fun? Does it sound like fun to play the same game 4 times to get to any additional content? That doesn't sound like an endorsement, that sounds like a sign to stay the hell away! To try and end on a positive note, and it's the last place I expected the game to knock it out of the park, I think the game nails the ending. After beating the Seneschal, you become the new Seneschal, and are free to roam through the 2 major cities in the game, totally invisible and unable to talk to anybody. The experience of being the new god of this world is extremely unfulfilling and sad, as the world you spent all this time saving is now forever out of reach. The people you met, the land you saved, you can't interact with any of it. It goes away to show how cruel and pathetic this cycle really is. Nothing is achieved by becoming the new Seneschal. All you do now is sit and wait for somebody else to come by and kill you. The only way to complete the final quest is to turn the blade that can kill the Seneschal, the God's Bane, on yourself. As a wrap-up to the game's theme of willpower, I think this self-sacrifice is perfect. What could take more willpower than sacrificing yourself to end a pointless cycle of destruction and give your most faithful companion the chance to live their own life? In making that ultimate sacrifice, you prove that you are the Arisen with the most willpower. To take your own life to free everybody else from the suffering that this cycle causes takes so much willpower that There could only ever be one person with that much. You give up your own body, and your pawn is finally allowed to live as a human. For as little as the story does to get me invested, it completely nails its most important part. So why can't I just say I like Dragon's Dogma? Well, I don't even know if that's a fair question. I do like Dragon's Dogma. When I get to play the game of Dragon's Dogma, I love it! I think that it's second to none in terms of fantasy RPG combat. Nothing comes close. I think it does big monster battles better than anything else. And I think that when it's allowed to just be that game, the game is one of the best Capcom's ever made. But the game that combat is in is a slog to get through where you feel stuck in place for hours. Quests are completely unengaging, with no memorable characters. The story barely exists. The world is boring, and you end out the game getting the best ending only because it would suck to get this far and then phone it in. It's honestly the inverse of the game I keep comparing it to, Skyrim. There, I get through the gameplay to get to the stories and characters. Meanwhile here, I'm only getting through the story and characters to get to the gameplay. I think that's where my loss of enjoyment really comes from, though. I think what was more important than me wanting to play was me wanting to keep playing. That's what happens when you care about what you're doing and who you're doing it for. When you just have the gameplay to look forward to without a strong feeling of why you're doing it, it hurts the overall experience. Let me say that I would rather play Dragon's Dogma, but I would rather beat Skyrim. I'd want to see that through to the end over Dragon's Dogma, which gets to be really hard to sit through after a while. To answer my own question on if I like the game or not, of course I do. I think it's great. But I also think it gets a lot of stuff wrong. You'll hear this game called the best 7 out of 10 you can ever play, but I couldn't go past 5. It feels like instead of loving the game because of all that it is, I love the game in spite of all that it is. Either this game is going to totally bounce off of you, ricochet around the room and break a family heirloom, or it's going to dig into you like a tick. For that reason, I think that even if you just have a passing interest, that you should try and see if you enjoy yourself with Dragon's Dogma. For better and definitely for worse, Dragon's Dogma is one of one. There is nothing in the world like it, and I totally understand why the people who love it fucking adore it. They got a game that fits everything they've ever wanted, and they're going to love the hell out of it. This is a game that wanted to do something very specific, and even if I didn't like all that it was, I have to acknowledge that it did have a strong vision and saw it through. Funny, considering the game apparently only has 60% of what was originally intended to be put in it. Hopefully one day they'll make a Dragon's Dogma 2 to finally make good on all the stuff this game sold us on.